Hey, so it's midweek here. I'm just working on the sermon for Sunday, but I did want to come back and touch on one of the topics from this past Sunday. We're in this part of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks ostensibly about prayer, but he says, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. And this is a really beautiful part of the Sermon on the Mount, but we can also be honest here, it is a difficult part as well. Because I think if we're being honest, we recognize that not everyone who asks receives. And so either Jesus is just naive, or maybe Jesus is just fudging things here a little bit. So how do we deal with this? Well, I have heard people say things like, well, God always answers prayer. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, sometimes the answer is not yet. The problem is, I don't think that really works in the real world. I mean, that just sounds like kicking the can down the road. Basically, you're saying God is always going to answer your prayer, but God's answer may be indistinguishable from nothing. And I don't think that's an honest way to grapple with what Jesus is really talking about here. And so we have to broaden our perspective a little bit. We have to pull back from the specific words in just this one line taken out of context to see everything that Jesus is inviting us into here. And really the key for me is how Jesus returns once again to our relationships with each other. That's what he's just been talking about in the opening of chapter 7. And then just after he talks about all of us who ask receiving, he says, so then, in everything you do for another, do what you would have them do for you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. This is Jesus returning to very familiar verbiage that we've heard him use before, but here he comes back to it in the context of our prayer. And as we said on Sunday, I think for me, this is Jesus saying that the more we become convinced that God is for us, the more we become convinced that God is listening to us in our prayer, the more we will instinctively become an answer for those who are around us, still waiting for their answer. See, I think Jesus is saying here that our conviction that we are listened to, our conviction that we can come, our conviction that we can ask, is at the same time our conviction that we are the answer for those who still seek. That all of this is bound up together, our connection to the divine, our connection to each other. That when we believe God is listening to us, we will become the kind of people who listen to each other. And this really becomes at once the invitation to come, but also this command to listen, to be there for each other, to be generous with each other, to use our resources in ways that answer prayers for each other, to be there in ways that listen and share our story with those who seek, to use everything we have at our disposal to answer the door for those who still stand outside and knock. And this is really what everything Jesus imagines for us becomes when we take it all in. That belief and faith and conviction for Jesus is not this hyper-individualized perspective that allows us to believe that God is on our side as an individual. It is something that draws us into our collective shared experience with all of humanity that surrounds us. And yes, we believe that God is for us as individuals. God is on my side. I really do truly believe this. But the more I believe it, the more it draws me back into solidarity with everyone who is around me, believing that the more I understand God, the more I will come to understand those around me, and the more I understand those around me, the more I will be drawn back to God. It really is this virtuous cycle that when I believe everything that Jesus tells me about God, I will become everything that those near me need to hear. And when that sinks into us, and we actually believe that the answer to our prayer is the way we are there for another, this may allow us in time to ensure that everyone who asks actually finds the answer they're looking for, that everyone who seeks finds someone willing to share their story with them, and that everyone who knocks will have a door opened to them by those who believe that God is for us. I know that's not always easy, and I know there have been moments where the door has not been open to you the way that it should have been. But trust me here, this is not because God forgot you or abandoned you. It is only ever because the community of God has not understood their responsibility well. And when you understand that, rather than that driving you away more into yourself, more individualized in your perspective on the world, even those moments of sadness and despair, those moments of loneliness should only ever drive you back towards another with more grace and more care for their moments of loneliness. And when that happens, I truly believe that in the fullness of time, when the kingdom of God touches down on this world the way that Jesus imagines, there will come a time when no one will ever ask and be left outside.